everybody. Welcome back to another midweek episode. Sometimes there's a word that you hear over and over in conversations, and you're like, I got to think about that one more. Here's the word that's kept popping up in conversations for me in the last few days. It's the word surrender. So I was hearing a Christian outdoor speaker by the name of Billy Moles, who is an Alaskan hunting guide. I heard him on Saturday, and in it he shared a little bit of his testimony where even though he was raised in the church, it wasn't until this moment where he was in the Alaskan wilderness that he finally broke down and he said, "God, I surrender to you." Then I had a conversation yesterday with a guy here in town that I've connected with over the last number of years, lost contact with him, and then randomly he reaches out to me and he's like, "Hey, there's something I got to tell you. Can we just get together?" And he's sharing his story of his journey. Like when I knew him a number of years ago, he was an agnostic. He wasn't sure what he believed about God. And then for the last 3 years, he told me he's gone down this path of being a Buddhist and an atheist. And yet somewhere in the midst of one of his meditation practices in the last month, he realized the emptiness of it all. And he said, I realized what was right, and I surrendered my life to Jesus. And I had a conversation recently with another young woman who has struggled with anxiety in her life. And as the conversation progressed, I mentioned something about surrender. Think about that a little bit more. Like often when we think of the word surrender, we associate it with like, okay, raising the white flag, like I surrender, I give up. And sometimes there's negative connotations with the word surrender. Like to surrender means that you lose. But do we really? Do we lose when we surrender? Because surrender is an act of submitting ourselves to the one who remains in control when so much is out of control. And this is what we spend a lot of our life doing. We try to control and manipulate and make things move in our favor. And we all reach this point where we're like, I can't do that, or it's not working for me. If you're an anxious person, that comes from a place of desiring to control. If you're somebody who struggles with angry outbursts, my guess is that's something that comes from a place of desiring to be in control. And when you're not in control, you lose control. That's what we call anger, right? And so what do you do when you find yourself in those places is you surrender eventually. You stop fighting. You submit yourself to the will of the one who remains in control, which is Jesus, the one who ultimately surrendered himself to the will of his Father, the one who suffered and died for you only to take his life back up again in the resurrection. That's the type of control that Jesus has. So will you let him have that over your life? Will you surrender to him? Because rather than losing, what I see is you actually win. Surrender is the gateway into being able to participate in everything that God has that is good for us. And Paul speaks of this surrendered life in Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. He says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ now lives in me. And the life I live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Each of us every day is invited to trust that God is good, to trust that his will is what is good and best for us. Today, I invite you to surrender. Maybe you've already surrendered your life to Jesus. Today, it's an invitation to do that once again. Maybe you have never surrendered. Maybe you have found yourself fighting, trying to stay in control. Maybe you found yourself struggling with anxiety or angry outbursts. Let me just remind you of this. You are not in control. And someday, maybe today, you'll realize that. empty. It's worthless until you surrender your life to the will of the one who remains in control, to Jesus, the one who suffered and gave his life for you. So thanks for joining me today. I'll see you again next time.